everyone. Welcome back to Correlations, part 2 of the Saturn-Pluto complex. I'm Jessica DiRuzza, and I'm here with the very fine Matthew Stelzner.
Thank you, Jessica. It's good to be here.
So good to be here with you.
For part 2.
Part 2. So we are here in Siesta Key, Florida, and going to dive right back into the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn that's in the sky from early 2018 through 2021. That is coming at the tail end of the Uranus-Pluto square, which has been happening since 2007-2008. So I want to pick up where we left off around the theme of separation that can relate to, especially Saturn, but with Saturn-Pluto, the themes of separation. So Saturn-Pluto can psychologically relate to that function of the psyche of splitting. And so by splitting, we mean things become very black and white. So there's good and there's bad. There's right and there's wrong. This is something that we all do. We all participate in splitting, and we all participate in projection. It's a very human, natural thing to do. And so where we left off was talking about the way that every planet or planetary combination amplifies consciousness in a way that is true to that combination. So one way that Saturn-Pluto amplifies consciousness is through the particular channel of showing us the ways that we are splitting or that we have become separate, either separated from ourselves or someone else, or separated from something. And so we can see this function play out very clearly in things like racism, sexism, xenophobia, classism, right? Where there becomes a power structure of hierarchy where the people at the top are considered good and therefore deserving of good things like resources, food, water, healthcare, safe spaces, and then the people at the bottom are considered bad or less than, and therefore undeserving of resources.
The divisions between the privileged and the disadvantaged.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or disenfranchised.
Yes.
Right.
And that's another theme that Saturn-Pluto relates to is resources, and there can be a tendency when coming from there can be a tendency to conserve resources, right? So there's the Pluto particularly relates to resources, and Saturn can conserve, right? Conservation, be more conservative, and so Saturn-Pluto can conserve resources. Mm-hmm. Now, there's nothing inherently healthy or unhealthy about that. It's the way that we conserve resources. So if we're coming from a place of balance and health, one positive way that we conserve resources in our own lives is, if we already have a harvest in our life, let's literally take food. If our fridge is already full of food, it's wise to conserve resources and use the food that's in our fridge instead of going out to eat or going to buy more food. The food in our fridge rots. We don't use it. It becomes a waste. And then we've spent more money and energy to get this new food. So
okay, pause for a second.
Yep.
Because what I end up grasping on is like I'm thinking metaphorically now of what you're.
Yes.
So I'm trying to follow what you're saying
yes.
to apply it metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it like psychologically that can rot if we don't conserve it?
Yes. What can psychologically rot if we don't conserve it, but also...
Or consume it
right.
properly.
What happens when our plate is already full and then we try to fill it with more things? Mm-hmm. Usually what happens is we become exhausted, fatigued, because we're under-resourced and there's a wastefulness to what we're doing.
Under-resourced and wasteful because the resources are there
yes.
and you're wasting them.
Yes.
Right.
And also oftentimes we already have what we need. Like oftentimes like Saturn-Pluto teaches us this is like oftentimes the things that we need to like solve a problem or find a solution or even like work on a project, we often already have it.
If we can slow down enough to find it and to put it into action.
Yes, instead of being frantic and frenetic and like anxious and chaotically like consuming more, looking for more, it's like there's already a lot just right here that I could tend to and work on and draw from to be resourced and supported in my life.
Right. Just taking that in.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I was wondering, how does composting fit into this?
Yeah.
What is composting psychologically when you are conserving resources? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, composting is a way to take the things that maybe one way, I haven't thought about this before, but like taking the things that we no longer need and letting them go so that energy can go back into something else. So composting is taking things that
have naturally been fully used.
Yeah, and so it appears to be waste, but instead of making it trash, we compost it, we give it back, put it back in the soil to nourish the soil. So like an example would be, I had some plans this summer that I was going to put my energy into, but as I've been getting closer to these plans, things have shifted in my life where I realized I need to let go of those particular plans and compost that energy that was going toward those plans to free up that space for new energy to come in. And until I'm willing to let go of those old plan ideas, the new energy can't come in. So I got to compost that energy of where my libido was being directed so that I can let the new thing that I intuitively feel actually wants to come in.
Right. The new life that can come if you allow a natural letting go and grief process so that you can bring your energy back towards life-enhancing activities.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a grief process, and sometimes I think it's just being honest with ourselves. Like, what do I really need? What do I really want? Versus, like, what should I need or what should I want? What should I do? It's like, no, what, like, really feels good here?
Mm-hmm. And letting things fall away.
Yeah.
That are not.
Yeah. But then, if we're coming from a fearful place of a scarcity consciousness, which also relates to the challenging side of Saturn-Pluto, then when we go to conserve resources, we can do it in a way where we are fearful that we're not going to have enough, and so we take away from other people. So the people at the top who have the power and the privilege can take the water, can take the food, can take the healthcare, can take the shelter from the people that are underprivileged, and therefore make them more underprivileged and less resourced, because the people that have the power are afraid to share that there's not going to be enough. And so that's another way that there can be a conservation of resources, but that's coming from what we would call a shadow place of scarcity consciousness.
Right. Right.
And so
paranoia could also be like a more extreme form of that.
Mm-hmm.
Extreme fears where you end up going into extreme conservation of resources for yourself or for a particular group.
Yes. When our lower chakras of, the root chakra of Saturn and the second chakra of Pluto get threatened, when our survival is either explicitly or implicitly being threatened, right? Directly or indirectly. Like the idea of it being threatened or it actually being threatened, a very natural human tendency is to go to an extreme place of overcompensating. So a really clear example of this is last fall when Hurricane Irma was coming toward the Florida coast.
Right.
Days before it was supposed to hit where I live here on the Gulf side, like the week before, all the gas ran out and all the water ran out at the grocery stores. And this was because people were supposedly preparing for the hurricane coming. And now some people were, probably in a balanced way, in a healthy, judicial way, preparing. But a lot of people, were scared there wasn't going to be enough and went to the gas station and took more gas than they needed to and more water than they needed to, and then it left the other people without gas. I mean, I was going to the gas station that week because I just needed to fill up my car, not because I was trying to prepare to have a full tank to get out of town.
Right.
And I couldn't put gas in my car to go do the errands I needed to do like a normal day because of it.
Right.
And so when there's mass hysteria, when there's massive fear, which is usually being fed to our imaginations by the mass media or those who are in power and control, when they're wanting a certain kind of response, which oftentimes we have to assume now is connected to capitalism and to consumption, because who controls a lot of the media? Oil companies, and that's a great time for all the gas to be used. Now, I'm not saying that they are saying, a hurricane's coming when it's not, because obviously it did, and real damage was done, and so I'm not trying to downplay that. And the honest to God truth is that level 5 hurricane that was supposed to hit here was a 1 by the time it got here, and there was minimal damage. I mean, if there was any damage, it was some trees coming down. Like, it really wasn't as fearful and as scary as what was being portrayed on the media. So my point is there's different levels of what can be happening there when we get into a fearful place, that there's not going to be enough resources. We can actually lose our humanity because we go into this more kind of primitive, selfish, self-centered survival protection mechanism instead of remaining a social being.
A primal fear response that leads to paranoia and hoarding behaviors, as opposed to conservation.
Egalitarian conservation. I mean, there's the drinking water here is clean enough. There's no reason that we couldn't have just filled up our bathtubs, filled up tubs, bowls and tubs to have water to shower and drink and cook in.
Right.
I mean, there really wasn't a reason for the water to be missing from the shelves.
Right.
So, it also has a lot to do with infrastructure, which relates to Saturn-Pluto as well, like how things are built from the inside out and how those systems work and like where the resources go to and where they don't go to.
Resources that go to, what did you say?
Like the way infrastructure is built directly is systematic in deciding who gets resources when and who doesn't.
So if we're thinking of infrastructure as Pluto-Saturn, it's like the deep structures that either serve conservation or prevent it.
Yeah, or serve the privileged and don't serve the underprivileged. I mean, we can think of, like when people say that people that are oppressed and underprivileged are the most affected by natural disasters, which are increasing, and the rushes of natural disasters are increasing. The reason that is both because in the first place they don't have access to the same resources as the people in power and privilege, but they're often also the last to be given resources from the way that the governmental infrastructure is set up to transport food and water and health services, right? So the whole way that our structures and systems are set up are a direct reflection of the plutonic power, which relates often to politics, the geopolitical, of like who gets what first, and that's often based on race, class, and gender. So white men tend to get resources before black women.
Right.
And that's because the government is, and the structures and systems that are coming out of the government are set up to do that, because who are the Saturnian rules and norms and rituals made up by and for? White men. So not only do white men hold the plutonic power, but they've created the rules and the systems and the structures to make sure that that power primarily stays with white men.
Mm-hmm. And under Pluto-Saturn, there's a potential for like an intensification of those powerful structures that privilege certain people.
Yes.
But also the potential for a total transformation of those structures in the direction of what are we using as the word conservation, or
yes,
more fair distribution of resources.
Absolutely.
So I'm also just thinking about on an individual level that we have privileged aspects of our psyche that get lots of resources, and then underprivileged, oppressed parts of our psyche that we have real barriers to. What do you think is the key to the transformation of those internal structures so that the resources can be more conserved and shared fairly amongst the different parts of the psyche?
Yeah. Well, like, for me, I'm primarily been identified as an extrovert in my life. And it's been important for my own balance to tend to the introverted parts of me. So I've been giving more resources to that part of myself by spending more time by myself. So I've been cultivating moments of solitude and cultivating moments of reflection, and I've been allotting more time for journaling and meditation so that I can resource the introverted part of me, as an example. Because the extroverted part of me would usually get most of the resources by being super social and very productive and very busy, like always having a project, always interacting with someone. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, it's very helpful for me to think about it that way. Because I think it's a potential moment, this Saturn-Pluto time period, for a redistribution of resources in a sustainable way.
Yes.
And I think that's what we were talking about earlier, is like the purpose of slowing down is to discover the new structures in your life that are sustainable over the long haul, over your whole life.
Yes.
And so there's a potential for an internal, and I think this is the larger question we were going to explore about Chris Bache's work around like the difference between collective work and individual work and timing of that regardless of what's happening on the collective level, where resources are obviously not being shared fairly, and there's major imbalance in who's privileged to have resources and who is not. That's a global problem.
Yes.
But it's also a totally individual problem in the way that we're talking about. And so there's an opportunity now to really look at that internally. How are you resourced, and is it distributed in ways that are not sustainable?
Yes. Yeah, from a family systems perspective, the family is usually set up in a way where one or two people, or like a group of people within the family, depending on how large the system is, gets the majority of the resources. So, like, let's take the example of parents, and let's say they have several children. There's usually the child or the children who get the majority of the resources, and then the one or the ones who don't get that much. And that means like attention and time from the parents. And then it can also mean money, but it can also just be like love and affect, and the sharing of that from the parent to the child.
Right.
So part of the redistribution of resources can then also needs to happen within group, within family systems. So it's happening. We gave the example of individually. Yeah, couples. So like usually there's the couple who like talks more and the other one who talks less, or the one who has big emotions and the other one who doesn't emote as much, or like the one who gets to be really successful and the one who's like doesn't feel, like there's often some level of polarity that's happening. And so like with the couple, part of the couple's alchemy and growth process in the system is to bring more reciprocity and mutuality to those qualities. So like a couple, for example, in my couple with my husband, or in most of my couples, I talk more. Like I'm very Sun Mercury, and I'm an extrovert, Jupiter Mars rising, like I have a lot of energy. Well, Travis, he's more quiet and he's an introvert. And so a practice in our relationship is I talk less and listen more, and he practices talking more.
Mm-hmm.
And so we both take responsibility for our tendencies and then take responsibility to do the other way of being.
And that is a redistribution of available resources of like time here, or what would be the resource?
Yeah, I think time, but also like the resource of support and being seen. Attention. The resource of attention.
Being seen.
Yeah, of attention.
Like in the example you were giving of birth and the support team,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the intention is to really be more in reciprocity, where both people are taking responsibility for sharing the love.
Yeah. And that builds more love and creates a softer, more relaxed environment.
Yeah.
There's this is just so many offshoots. You see this a lot in group work, like as a teacher, the students who ask a lot of questions and the students who never talk. How, as a teacher, but also as the group, take responsibility for creating a safe enough space for the people who don't talk as much to be able to come into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have to practice listening and getting quiet and being in silence to create the space. Because like some people need silence in order to speak. And the fact of the matter is we don't really know how to speak until we learn how to listen. And so listening is a key practice in order to be able to actually truly give voice. We have to be able to listen.
Let's pause for a second. What feels most alive for you right now?
I think just around the piece, around the Saturn-Pluto amplifying schisms, and that, like, we all do it. We all split. We all go into, like, right-wrong consciousness. So for me, it's not a matter of whether or not we're doing that. It's what we then choose to do with the awareness once we know, I'm doing that thing. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's the moral vector of Saturn-Pluto. Like, it's often described as like the moral backbone or the moral evolution. Like Saturn's the moral piece and Pluto's the evolution, like the moral evolution that happens with the confrontation with shadow and, being at this moral crossroads. Like, what are you going to do? Like, for me, what that is like, once we wake up to injustice and an imbalance of power, what am I going to do as an individual to take responsibility for restoring justice and the imbalance of power? And that's where our character is defined. That's where our morality is shaped. Do we follow the moral compass, or, do we continue to perpetuate the injustice and the imbalance? So, like, it's all been in the collective psyche, especially, I would say especially in the United States, but in the collective psyche, we're all waking up to the injustice of power, from like the Me Too movement to Never Again to what's happening in the Trump administration and like him being described as a mob boss, and like the epidemic of narcissism and like the relationship between the narcissist and the empath, and how those two things are formed out of this dynamic, just like how the victim-perpetrator is formed out of a dynamic. The world is waking up to the level of splitting we've all done, from racism and sexism to classism and xenophobia and like prejudice against people who are essentially different in whatever way one can be different. The Saturn-Pluto moment is going to be a continued amplification of that awareness with the consequential choice point of what we're going to do individually and as groups of people in response to that imbalance of justice and power.
Okay, give me a second with that. Yeah, I'm thinking of also the splitting within ourselves, and how Saturn-Pluto relates to like the potential for the most powerful splits internally in terms of the most repressed fear material or shadow material that's in the psyche. And once you're aware of that schism within yourself, what do you do with that? How do you develop your character in response to the inner schism?
Yeah.
How do you take responsibility for that inner schism?
Yes.
And this, to me, feels related to the conversation we were having about Chris's work and how our inner schisms are related to collective schisms and anchor the collective schisms, and how we become aware of our own personal complexes or whatever is very related to the healing of the collective. But you can say it a whole lot better, I think.
Well, no, I mean, I think you just really said it. I mean, I think that there's a couple different entry points into what you're saying, but like one that I want to bring up is, I think there can be this tendency when we wake up to pain in the world and how massive it is, and the level of injustice that's happening all across the board for all walks of life, all around the world, that we want to do something about it. I mean, often like there's that impulse to want to do something about it, and there's often this stage in one's healing where there's this, I notice this impulse to want to heal the world, even to save it. And I really struggle with that, although I think that it's extremely well-intentioned. I do find it as a form of spiritual bypassing often. In that, I think often we can forget, or I notice that people forget that we are the world. We're not separate from it. So this world that needs to be saved, first of all, what world? There is no one world. There, whose world? Whose world? Because right now, the world, I mean, are you talking about Mother Gaia? Because, yeah, it really fucking sucks that we're killing so many innocent creatures, and I don't like it one bit. But, we're not going to kill Gaia. If anything, we'll die before she dies. I mean, we're not going to kill her. Life is too strong and powerful for that. So, okay, save Gaia. I mean, I don't even know what that means anymore. But, save the world, now I'm not talking about nature. I'm talking about, the world. There is, in my view, there is no world. There is, as if there was one world. I mean, it became so clear to me when I was in Asia last year. What I say the world is, when I think of the world, is definitely not what the people I was spending with there weren't inhabiting the same world that I was in. So I'm not really sure what world we're trying to save, but even beyond that, let's say there's that impulse to heal the world or heal the collective.
Right.
It is impossible to do that without taking care of ourselves. And I don't mean that we don't have brilliant offerings and gifts to share with the world, because we do. But like, if we're trying to go out there and like save people or heal people or whatever at the expense and sacrifice of taking care of ourselves and healing our own schisms and our own pain, like, what are we actually doing? Mm-hmm. I don't think we can jump over ourselves to like go and spread the good word, whatever our version of what we think the good word is. Like, everyone should meditate, or everyone should eat well, or everyone should volunteer, everyone should know astrology, or everyone should be in therapy, like whatever it is.
Where there's some kind of vision of what will heal the world, and then kind of being a part of that heroic, life-saving endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much more real and difficult to do that in our own individual lives because, you know, it's like, in a way, that other thing is a concept, and it's a bit of an abstraction. Like, it's a lot more challenging for me to like have to show up in my own life and like take care of myself and be present for the people around me and like work the challenges that are inherent to living and like the messiness of relating and having consciousness.
Mm-hmm. The messiness of relating, and where you're in that reciprocity of sharing love so that you can receive it.
Yeah, like I have to be able to deal with my own violence toward myself or toward people in my own life before I can say, I really wish we would stop killing each other and, you know, world wars would stop. And it's like, yeah, of course we all want that, but like...
Well, this is where, when enough individuals do their own individual work in their relationships and their communities, that, you know, this idea of collective consciousness, the power of transformed consciousness on a collective level, whether that's just 10 people and how their consciousness, more whole consciousness or integrated consciousness, can impact powerfully the local world or the whole world or whatever we're calling the world. And I mean, this is where I feel Chris Bache's work is just very relevant and very interesting to talk about and explore.
Yeah.
And I just want to say something I was saying to you yesterday, which is when Chris's book came out, Dark Night, Early Dawn came out, I don't know if it was actually released in 2000, or do you know what year? It was 99, 2000
yeah,
about.
Yeah, it was like 99, 2000.
Yeah, I think it was right there. And I took a class with him at CIS right as he had the manuscript finished, and then the book was published. So I feel like I was very closely associated to the birth of that book, and also how it was taken in by some of the Bay Area community that I'm connected to, and particularly the holotropic breathwork community and the Groff transpersonal training community. That book was very well understood in the community. When it came out, it made a big impact, and especially kind of the core thought form of the book, or one of them, which is this idea of, and you're going to help me with this.
Yes.
But the idea that our own healing work within ourselves and in our personal lives, to the degree that is deep, that it is in a way of service to the whole. Absolutely.
And part of what Chris brings up when he's talking about that is that, you know, there's no such thing as private karma. There is no such thing as private pain. That every pain or struggle that we have in our life is because it's part of the collective human experience. And the same goes for our virtues. That, you know, whatever virtue we have it because it's part of the collective human experience. That, you know, the gifts and challenges that we inherit from our ancestors that have been developed over time and eons. Like, there's no such thing as either privatized karma or privatized pain or privatized virtue. Like, this whole secular capitalistic understanding of like owning that, like we don't own it. And so yes, like fundamentally, therefore, any kind of individual personal healing is a collective transpersonal healing, because we're not separate from the collective or the transpersonal. We are the bridges and the anchors to those realms. I mean, and this is what Chris brings up, that like he realized by the time that he got to the end of his session work, which he didn't know was going to be the end until the very end, when he was told by the universe, it became revealed to him like it was time to put down doing this high dose LSD work, by going into the sessions, that his personal woundings, the reason why they weren't fully cleansed during those 73 sessions and not fully addressed in a pretty big way until the end of those sessions, was because without our personal wounds, we wouldn't be able to do that transpersonal collective healing, because they're both the anchors and bridges to that realm. That we would neither have the drive to heal, or we also wouldn't be able to have the understanding and the compassion. Right? I mean, empathy is developed out of our suffering. Compassion is developed out of our suffering. And compassion naturally includes an expansion of self-awareness, where the self literally grows to include more than it was before. And there's a healing in that process, and that compassion that's what's happening. But we couldn't have that if it wasn't for the suffering. Mm-hmm. And so there is no such thing as just personal healing, because we both have those wounds because of the collective, and when we go to heal our individual wounds, it naturally then heals that morphic field of that particular complex or archetypal dynamic that we're participating in this given incarnation.
So I'm just thinking about how that would look in a pragmatic way right now in the world with Saturn-Pluto in conjunction, and thinking about some of the recent stories, whether it's the Harvey Weinstein scandal or the Parkland shooting, or what's developing with Facebook awareness of a massive invasion of privacy, an unprecedented scale. If we're becoming aware of these and activated by these stories, mm-hmm. What does Chris's model say about that? Like that you do you become an activist for the Me Too movement, or do you do that and be doing your inner work at the same time, or is there just a kind of feedback loop there?
I mean, I think we do what we're called toward. Like if you want to become an activist, please, by all means. We all need to take different roles. I mean, different strokes for different folks. There's a reason why we all have different callings and proclivities. It's what makes the world go round. Like the different vectors of experience. And I don't know if I'm saying this because I'm a therapist or it's the way I'm constitutionally built, but I think that ultimately we cannot bypass the individual work that on ourselves. I could be wrong about that, but I just don't really see or understand. Like maybe there could be a point where like enough humans have done a certain aspect of healing that then like there's some kind of shift in the resonance field and like all beings move to like a higher vibration around that particular issue.
I think that's definitely possible.
But I don't think that we're going to get there without enough individual people doing the work.
Right.
So I do think that is a core practice I know I have for myself, and that I like to support other people. And I mean, so why I'm a therapist is I think it's absolutely sacred and revolutionary work to be doing one's inner work and healing, and to support people in that journey.
It's revolutionary. Did you say that?
Yeah, it's revolutionary. And I really think Gandhi was right when he said, be the change you wish to see in the world. Like, yeah, how else? We are the world. How else is the world? There is no world outside of us. We are the world. In order to change the world, we have to change ourselves.
Right.
That's how it works.
It's certainly something I'm very deeply reflective on in terms of like the Me Too movement and how do I situate myself in that, and what's my responsibility there? How can I see my own participation in this story about unconscious male predatory sexuality, immature predatory sexuality.
Yeah.
And the programming, the cultural programming, the family programming, and so forth that exists for someone like me, a white male of tremendous privilege, and also, lots of different kinds of things that are related to the story. And so I feel for myself during this time period where I'm a part of that collective story and all of the karma that white male people like myself have, that I'm connected to through the kind of morphic fields that Chris writes about. And so then how can I do my own work, take my responsibility for everything that relates to this, and then try to do my own work to transform that and make amends for that in my life.
Yeah. What you're describing is a huge undertaking because it requires many steps and levels of awareness. I mean, to even allow yourself to become aware of your white male privilege, and then to allow yourself to begin to acknowledge it by feeling into the ways that is true, has been true in your life. It takes tremendous courage to be able to do that, because it's a very shame-inducing process to go through. I mean, for any of us to wake up to our ignorance tends to induce a certain amount of shame. And that's where the antidote to shame is love. And I think that we have to be able to genuinely find ways to love ourselves into that moment, because if you are violent toward yourself as you wake up to ways that maybe you've perpetrated,
right,
it's just a continuation of that perpetration and violence, and that's where it gets real sticky. And you said this in your WTF forecast, which is that we need support in order to do our shadow work, because it's so big, and we all we need someone else to be there with us in that, to help hold us and love us, and to help remind ourselves to love ourselves as we go through the immensity of that process.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of, what I'm hearing in that, and that can be, a support group for men who are waking up to their white privilege, to being in therapy, to,
right,
doing all kinds. I mean, there's all. Once you have the awareness and you have the intention, there absolutely are the resources available to do that work. Even if you're broke and you can't afford, there's free therapy. There are always resources. It's just a matter of having a willing heart to do that work.
Yeah, there's got to be 50,000 free 12-step meetings out there where you can find a good free sponsor who will absolutely take you through the shadow work, if you're willing to do the slow, hard work. Because I think shadow work is slow, deep work that you don't just heal in a few weeks. I mean, it's definitely an ongoing part of your whole life, of course. Yeah. And there are periods like a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, a 3-4 year period, where if you have an intention at the beginning of that 3-4 year period to do deep, slow work with your shadow material, And this idea of how have you been a perpetrator in your life, and how do you work with that? How do you heal that? It's not a quick process, you know?
Yeah.
And so having that intention to do deep and slow work with support, with love for yourself, and in a context of loving support.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the opportunity that I see personally to this time period. I know that in my life, other times where I've looked at stuff like my own privilege and how has it shaped my life. I've done other moments of that, and I've done other periods of like sexual shadow work, and yet it's like they're the waves of this shadow work where there's a deeper possibility for deep structural transformation of that material.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one way I'm thinking about becoming resourced from this time period. Is it's an opportunity to do another round and to find the support that I need to do some specific work that's now more in my awareness, because the collective is more aware and it's more openly talked about, and that gives more permission for it to be explored for all of us, I would say.
Yeah, that feels true. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to say more about the victim-perpetrator idea? I think you said you wanted to.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, I don't know how much I have to say about it right now, but the comment I made in part one was just that, you know, if we become identified with being a victim, we often are also perpetrating. And it's not to say that that's why it's tricky to even talk about these things so abstractly, is because, like, there is a dimension of healing where it is important to be like, yeah, I was a victim of violence. I was a victim of abuse. Like, that was not right. I don't mean it in that way. Like, identifying as a victim. I don't mean it like that. I mean, like how can I give an example of this? Like, okay, so, you know, I've talked about before how, you know, my dad didn't raise me, and he left when I was 4. And we've totally reconnected now and are, you know, really good. But for, you know, 20-something years of my life, that wasn't the case. And yes, I was a victim of that. Like, I was a child. I didn't, you know, choose that. I didn't want that. I mean, you could argue that on some higher level I did choose that, but I mean, like, as far as this third dimension goes, right, I didn't choose that. I was a victim of that. I was powerless in that situation. There comes a point where, one, it's necessary to identify with that. Like, in order to take responsibility and heal for the little girl who didn't have a dad, I need to be able to own and be like, yeah, I was a victim. That really sucked. That hurt. It caused a lot of pain. And there were a lot of issues I had that came out of that unfortunate situation.
Right. Or on a collective level, when you wake up to how you're being oppressed or victimized by the power structures of society.
Yes.
It's important to be able to name, this is fucked up.
Right.
This is bullshit.
Right.
BS.
Yes.
Right.
Then there becomes a point, after a certain point, no specific amount of time, where, like, if I continue to hold on to that and say, well, you know, my life doesn't work because my dad wasn't there. That's not a very empowering position to take, because I do that enough times, I move into victim consciousness and, like, I'm powerless, I'm helpless, and these bad things are happening to me because, you know, this person did this, and then I'm blaming that person. There's a difference there in those two approaches. And so I believe that there comes a point in our healing, after we become aware and we've worked with something for a while, to move into a different relationship with it, where I still acknowledge that that happened, and so now what am I going to do about it? It's my choice now on whether or not I get help and support for healing that little girl whose dad wasn't there and felt completely powerless. And there are ways to do that. And, you know, I chose to do that through therapy.
Right.
And now I don't identify with that anymore. And if I'm having dysfunctionality in my relationship with men, let's say,
right,
I need to take ownership for that and do something about it.
Right.
It's not right or fair anymore for me to say, well, my dad wasn't there for me, so, therefore I get to treat you like shit or whatever.
Right. And you've made great efforts to participate in the system between you and your father in a way that could transform that relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, I genuinely did enough inner healing around my dynamic with him where I have complete forgiveness for what has happened, and I'm no longer angry with him. I'm no longer resentful or like looking for him to do something for me or give me something, and it's freed up the dynamic. And I don't know what he's done on his end, but it has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's been willing to show up to the degree that you've been willing to show up, it seems, from what you've told me.
Yeah, we're showing up in each other's lives in pretty big ways now, and that's healing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've gotten to a place of neutrality. Like, it doesn't... I like this, actually. Chris said this to me the other day, like, getting to a place where we feel neutral about someone or something, but it doesn't excuse what happened. Like, I don't excuse what happened. I don't say, oh, that was okay that you weren't there for me. No, that wasn't okay. That's never okay to abandon a child. For whatever the reasons, I know it was complex. Not okay.
Right.
But I forgive. And now it's neutral. Like, there's not suffering there anymore.
Right. You wouldn't be able to have your own personal moral framework if you just excused it or didn't kind of anchor that there's a distinction between, my own values and what I'm committing to in this world and what's happened to me in the past.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think part of the tricky part of the healing process that I'm continuing to learn about is like the natural part of healing does include difficult emotions like anger and hatred and resentment and all kinds of things, envy and jealousy and all this stuff that's challenging to work with, and we can't skip over that. And I had to feel my anger, I had to feel my grief, I had to feel my sadness, I had to take the time to do the shadow work, to feel those emotions and get the support to feel those emotions so I could get to the place of forgiveness and neutrality.
And it's a deep, slow process. Like, how long would you say from the point where you started to consciously work on this kind of victim idea, that where you were over-identified as a victim, to the point where you became more neutral?
I think I started to wake up to it around 2021, but I didn't really come to like true acceptance of this situation with my dad until late 2010. And then once I became aware of it, I got into therapy almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And I was in weekly therapy solidly, I think, for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then I did some couples therapy because I got into a partnership with my husband, Travis.
Right.
Did couples therapy to help continue that inner work I was doing. And then through my training as a therapist and being in supervision and working that material in another way with my clients, I would say that was from 2010 until my dad and I really had our forgiveness in spring of 2016.
6 years?
6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I put everything I had into that healing. Like, it wasn't like a dipping in, dipping out occasional thing. It was the core focus of my healing.
The focus
was my dad, healing the stuff with my dad.
Right. That's interesting because that's Saturn's focus, and Pluto's the life force energies that you have for anything in your life. Mm-hmm. So Saturn-Pluto is a kind of focused libido that you can put towards something that you get very serious about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why it can give us really amazing results when we do that level of intentional work.
So when you're willing to commit to a deep, slow process of working with this painful material,
Yeah.
and something I said in the WTF video, though, is that level of focus that you gave to it, I assume you're still having a certain degree of balance in your life, and it's not everything you're doing. You're having fun, and you're getting enriched by your relationships, and having pleasure, and so forth.
On my good days, there was definitely times in there where it felt like it was my whole world, and it was. I mean, the trauma was just so, working with the trauma was so immense. But,
right.
Yeah, I mean.
That would be more early phase, maybe.
Yeah.
When you're first really opening up to all of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it gets maybe more balanced over time. I'm just thinking for myself of my own kind of moments of deep shadow work, and from the point of really starting that work to when there's a real kind of harvest of dividends or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, I started to do a really big piece of shadow work around 2007. And I think it paid off about 4 years later to some degree. Mm-hmm. But then it feels like in some ways it was much longer than that, like almost like a 10-year period where some of that deep process that got started back in 2007 started to really bear fruit in 2017.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, all kinds of other shadow areas that I'll have 10-year processes with, I'm sure, are opening up.
Yeah.
But certain key focused areas of shadow work, deep, slow, committed process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we're wanting to fundamentally restructure the core of our being, I mean, the reason that takes time is because, mm-hmm. The wound with my dad almost like had a string or cord to every other thing in my life. I mean, that's what trauma does. Like, big T trauma affects every aspect of our life. And so to really heal that, it's not just like I'm focusing on this one thing. Even though I am focusing on this one theme touches literally every single relationship and experience in my life. So
right.
That takes time and diligence, and like we can't do it all at once. It would overwhelm us. And so,
right. It's stretched out over time. Really, nature designs it that way because it is, gentler or more loving or patient.
Yeah, and I think, there's things we work on for lifetimes and lifetimes, and I think it's hard to remember that sometimes in the third dimension, especially in this particular version of the Matrix, where reincarnation isn't widely in the West practiced and accepted, but that, there are things that
that's very
my
helpful.
soul has worked on for lifetimes, and things that we admire in people, we have to assume they've been developing that for eons.
Right.
And that's also why, when we say, why me, which comes out of our pain and feeling isolated, it's like, well, why me? I mean, it's a tough question to ask, because I understand the sentiment behind it, which is really saying, like, I don't want to be alone in this. Please don't make me be alone in the suffering. And I mean, that's the thing about it, is when the thing that most prevents us for asking for help is, I think, the shame around the pain that we're in. And so we do it by ourselves, and that often naturally prolongs the healing process.
Say that last two sentences again.
That when we're in our suffering and our pain, usually there's shame around it, and so we don't ask for help.
Shame around the pain.
Yeah, like when we feel alone in our pain, that's shame. It's like, oh, like I'm the only one that's feeling this, and like, why me, or this is so ugly, or this is so bad, or this is unforgivable, or I'm never going to be able to heal this, or no one's going to love me, or no one can help me, or how am I ever going to forgive that I, hurt this person in this way, or whatever it is. And so it prevents us from asking for help because asking for help first admits that we have a problem, but then we have to share that problem and reveal it to another person so they can come in and help us. And that brings up all kinds of things like trust issues. Can that person really understand me? Can they really help me? What if they come in and they see that, like, oh man, wow, you're so fucked up. Like, you're the most fucked up person I ever met. I mean, that's the feeling behind it. It's just never the case, but that's the feeling. And
bringing it back to the birth metaphor of the last one, we're talking about trying to be in an ongoing birthing process of our own potential on our own with tightness and without a loving reciprocity happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me that a lot of people are in a kind of suffering that's like really difficult. The pain of those rushes that it's not, where they're not being ridden, where they're just collapsing in them, and there's no rescue to be found.
I mean, no healthy baby is born on its own. It takes a mother and a father, or it takes two parents plus a whole team, and everybody needs that. The baby needs that. The mother needs that. The other parent needs that. We need that. We need support. We need help. We need that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking here. One of the ways that my shadow work has paid off, is back in 2007 and 8 that there was a lot of pain in my family, and particularly in my relationship with my parents, and the shadow work that I was doing then, started to open possibilities up. One particular thing I did was this thing called the Hoffman process, which is actually a kind of shorter but deep work that can reveal trauma. I think maybe is the helpful thing. It really makes shadow material very available. You see it, and you address it to some degree there. And now I'm realizing that some of the awareness that came then has been a deep, long, slow process that ultimately led to some really deep structural change in my family that was more temporary back then. Like, it was a temporary healing that did change things. But if I wasn't continuing to do a lot of different things over the last 8-9 years or whatever, I don't know how deep the healing would be at this point. And it does feel like some really deep positive things are happening in my family, which is partly why I'm here in Sarasota. I think we've mentioned it before that my parents just happen to live down the road from where you and Travis's parents are. And so I've been coming here a lot this last year to try to transform my relationship with my parents and to make the possibility of to clear the possibility for something to blossom at this point, which I think is possible. There's all kinds of evidence that something is possible now that would not be possible if there wasn't a long period of deep work that led to here. And so I'm just feeling grateful right now. This is a helpful conversation for me to kind of affirm some of the deep work that I've done, rather than another possibility with Saturn-Pluto is to basically go towards shame and self-judgment and, I'm still fucked up, or there's all this stuff that's still not resolved. But to be able to affirm that I have had like a kind of commitment that comes out of my own character to kind of slowly address things. And I think, I don't know if I would have realized it until this conversation, but it's helping me just kind of validate what my approach has been to my own shadow material, which has been a kind of slow, patient, loving approach to it, as opposed to like trying to rush myself. Maybe I've done that in moments, but I'd say the general approach that I've had is being patient with myself, still seeing my shadow lots of the time, but recognizing it's getting better, affirming that, and recommitting, not trying to avoid that stuff. Like, I'm still going to engage in it, but in a slow, deep way that isn't forced from a kind of shame-based motivation, which I think is when you're judging yourself for your shadow and kind of motivating yourself from that, like, I'm bad and I got to get better.
Yes.
Versus there's a natural healing process that you can participate in with your shadow material, your pain, your whatever. That process is inherently a deep, slow process, and so you can trust it and move slowly with it, which is great, because that's not true for lots of other things. Maybe, maybe there are areas where that's not as true, but to be in a moment where you can remember that there are these kind of deeper, slower processes that you can show up for and not pressure yourself to get through.
Yeah, often when there's that, I notice for myself that sense of urgency to fix something or do something or make it better.
Right.
It's a bit of a flag for me, like, hey, what's going on? What's going on right now?
I think that's especially true with something like, well, I mean, it could be so many areas. It could be as a white male just recognizing the power of racism in the world and to the degree racism is alive in me, and to see stories where it's clearly happening, and to then, there can be that impulse to, like, I got to do something in myself. I got to figure out how to not be a part of this. Or with the Harvey Weinstein thing, maybe even more so, like right now anyway, the sense of waking up to a level of awareness of what's been going on that maybe some of us white males haven't been aware of, to the degree that it's now just being talked about all the time. And so I know for me, every time I read another story that's related to that, I try to take it in and listen to it and be with it, and to see, okay, how can I become more aware of how I'm doing anything like this, or have done anything like this in my life? That's not fun to be with that. And to trust that it's okay to be with it in a deep but slow way, like to go deep with what's happening, but to be patient with yourself. I think that's an awareness that I'm kind of anchoring in this conversation, I would say.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to bring this episode to a close. But I have no doubt that there is more. So thank you so much. Thanks for being here and just sharing and opening up. I really appreciate.
Oh, it's been so great, Jessica. It feels like, I said this during the break, I mean, it's a different setting here.
Yeah.
We've never quite sat in furniture like this. Not in my apartment. We didn't sit in anything like this exactly. And we didn't have what's back here in my apartment either. Maybe we should just show them what's behind.
Beautiful bay. Sarasota off in the distance. Boats down below. Really blessed with this beautiful view and deck here, so gonna watch the birds fly. Yeah.
But it's felt different energetically, and you said it feels more grounded.
Yeah.
It feels like that. And we're talking about being more grounded, so it makes perfect sense that we would wind up in a setting or
that we've evoked and participated in the energies.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Talking about them, evoking them, would manifest them, or manifest the potential there.
It manifests the potential, and then we willingly chose to participate within it in a certain way.
So awesome. I feel so much more grounded.
I know, me too.
Whew. Cool. Feels different than other. Have we ever done it? We've done other Saturn-Pluto alignments. One other one. That was with Uranus, though. This is a different one. It's a conjunction.
Do you want to keep going? I mean, we're gonna have to pause it here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't stop talking.
We can keep talking. We're just gonna cut it and then.
No, I feel complete.
You do?
Yeah, and this is more of the post conversation, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here with us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, you can follow us on correlationsblogspot.com.
Correlations.blogspot.com, I think.
Listen to him.
Yes.
And follow Matthew's YouTube channel, Matthew Stelzner,
which is also where the correlations videos are.
That's where this exists.
For now.
Yeah. Please like us if you like it and leave comments if you feel called. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.